We're going to go ahead and get started. Just in the essence of time, we're going to hard stop at 1:10. So we've literally got 40 minutes with Matt to cover all the universal questions you may have. So feel free to ask questions as we go, but we do have some that have come in through the chat, and Ashley Tyden is going to start with that. So I want to thank Ashley. I want to thank Matt for being here for yet another session with us, his third one. He's like a golden-haired kid with us this meeting. And then Doha, we thank her for her help. She's one of our education committee members, and she's helping us as well. So if you have a question, she can bring a microphone to you so that the people online can hear what's being said. So welcome to breakout session number 1, understanding the PMB, and Ashley, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Connie. Thank you again, Matt, for being with us. So we have some questions that came in through the chat and some questions that we know are out there in the clinical research community. So the first one is, you announced earlier that the new planned implementation for phase 1 is happening on January 6th. I know my fingers were flying telling people that was happening, and that phase 2 is going to be coming out in February and March. I know that a lot of our sites, our pharmacists are hoping to get that date so that they can start planning in advance, making sure they have enough investigational stock on hand in case there's any snafus, and to allow for that 24 to 48 hour downtime. Will there be a formal announcement coming out from PMB, or the FAQs be updated more broadly?
Yeah, the FAQs are a little harder to get the update out, but we are going to be sending out announcements, and we certainly will send out something prior to the holidays to make sure people have an opportunity to get their stock up to date, and if they need extra stuff to cover that period of time. The January 6th is a Friday, so if it goes down Friday night and comes back up Monday morning, most people will, not even notice that it's been down. They come in Monday morning, they should be able to order like normal.
Right. Awesome. Okay. And then many institutions use e-inventory systems like NCU and Vestigo as their institutional source for dispensing, that source of truth. We've had some conversations where there's some concerns about the concept of original source. If we move towards using Aurora for the dispensing system, but already have these kind of institutional SOPs and systems in place where the Vestigo or NCU system is our source of truth. Do you have any thoughts about how sites should approach that and what system they should use as their true source?
So we get this question a lot, actually. This is something certainly that we thought of from the beginning. We reached out to some of the commercial systems, the NCU, the Vestigo. We weren't able to find a system that would be able to address all of our needs and the needs that we have and the site needs, that we need to have them reporting to us. So we did venture out on our own and create a homegrown product that we eventually plan on making mandatory. So if it's mandatory for if we make it mandatory, and that's probably not until third, fourth quarter of 2023, that would be what we would consider the source of truth and what would be audited against. So I know that kind of overlaps with some of the systems, but we certainly wouldn't we don't require double documentation, and that's another question I think that probably will come in. But we would expect that EDARF within Aurora to be the source of truth.
Okay. Are there any updates as to whether Aurora may ever have the capability to integrate or speak to any of those off-the-shelf systems?
Well, because we figured that was going to be a question, there have been ports or technology integrated into the system that's the end goal. And we'd certainly want to be able to integrate if we can get to a point where we have an agreement with the companies that are interested in doing that, and they can pour it into our information and we can share things with them. But that, again, we're 3 or 4 years from inception from when we started Aurora. So, we're focused right now on getting it launched and getting it opened to the site. So that is something we're absolutely 100% looking at. I couldn't even venture a guess when that would be available.
I wonder if that's something that we could take away, though, if there's not necessarily pressure, but this want coming from both the NCI and every institution out there that uses Vestigo or NCU to pressure them to come up with a a link or a technology transfer system, that this is really important for almost every cancer center out there to have.
Yeah, and that's, part of the problem when we were developing this system was that we have sites who have only ever done everything on paper.
Right.
And they are jumping for joy that they're going to have Aurora available to them as an electronic system. And then we have some of the larger institutions that have instituted Vestigo or NCU, and they're like, well, wait a second, we don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
So we had to balance what we needed to do for our regulatory compliance. And I'm sure once we launch and we have that feedback, depending on the feedback, that may accelerate what the implementation plans are for integration.
Yeah. I think, Matt, you had said to me that the same system has been in place for over 20 years at NCI. So I think it's a great time for change, right?
I don't know if it's ever a great time for change, but change is inevitable.
That's right.
We have to get there.
I have a couple more questions on my list, but I want to see if there's any questions from the audience. No, okay, I'll keep going then. Okay. So you had shared with us earlier in your presentation some really great resources that are available on the website, training modules that that all of the pharmacists should be taking, and through the class system. But I wonder if any other roles or individuals at sites should be taking this. If like regulatory coordinators, pharmacy technicians, CRAs, if this would be helpful for anybody else within the institution to take.
Sure, that's a good question. So we have about a dozen or maybe 14, 15 different videos on the class system, and they hit different parts of the eDARF or Aurora and the eDARF. And document access. So people that are maybe a CRA at the site that doesn't really have any interaction with drug accountability or anything like that, they do have access to the investigator brochures and the safety data sheet. So that's something that they can access with their credentials that they have that came with their IM or IDME account. Yeah. So they certainly should sign in and be able to work in the system. They're not getting different information. It will look different because the technology is different, but they have access to what they had before. If they were doing it before, they should be able to do it on January 8th, 9th, when it comes back up. But it would be good to have at least the technicians. They will be working with the eDARF eventually, and the pharmacist, of course, so that they are familiar with the ordering and the accountability, certainly.
From even outside of the Aurora classes and sessions and videos that are available, PMB has some amazing, very short videos on how to complete DARFs. I was training a brand new auditor. She'd never prepared a site for a SWOG audit before. And so she got the DARFs and she was like, I don't know what to look for. So we sat down and watched every single one of those videos, really step by step. So if you guys haven't taken a moment to watch those videos, I'd really highly recommend that you do. They're super helpful for anybody that is preparing for an audit specifically.
Yeah, and so that we kind of tagged onto that to create the new videos for Aurora. But if you get a chance to check out the old ones, the narrator's awesome.
Yeah. Is that your voice? I thought I recognized it from somewhere.
I just had a comment.
Of course.
Just one other thing that we have found those videos really helpful for, we use them every year for an annual competency training for all of our staff across our consortium. Anybody who's going to deal with investigational agents, whether they think they need to know or not, they probably need to know something. So we have found that really helpful, those videos. All of our pharmacists, the techs, our staff, nurses who are doing drug orders, people who are bringing drug to and from the site, anybody who's touching investigational drug, we use that as our competency module. So we don't have to reinvent it, and then we can document training. So if that's helpful to others.
So as part of class, actually, we do have the ability to get a report of who's taken the training and how much of the training they've completed. So if you tell us that you've taken training, we can check. So don't tell us, don't try and fool us. So if you are, and one of the things that we are looking at too, and this is depending on how it gets implemented, the training may become a requirement down the road. So we're looking at how we can do that and if that's something that's feasible to do for different levels of people. If you're just accessing for documents versus you're accessing for training on the EDARF system itself. So to take away from that, it could be mandatory. We're not going to make you retake it if you've taken it already or if you watch the videos, but it may be mandatory in the future. And we do have a report if you need to follow up and you're going to use that for some kind of an audit checklist.
Makes for a great CAPA if you've been cited for investigational drug management issues. It's a handy thing to write in your CAPA, that training.
Our site, I work with a lot of community oncology practices where the pharmacists, especially when we onboard a new site, they may not ever have handled investigational product before, and we don't have a dedicated pharmacy that only deals with investigational product. So they're just coming into this not knowing anything about how to handle investigational drug. So we created this pharmacist onboarding checklist, including links and references to everything the PMB offers. There's this great handbook there, and we make them initial instead of certify that they've read this and they don't have any questions for us. So there's just really wonderful resources on here for pharmacists. There's also great resources to the HOPA IDS. I'm going to blank on the acronym, Hematology Oncology Pharmacists Association. That's it. Yes. They have a great investigational drug service handbook as well.
The other thing I want to mention too with the PMB website in itself, there's tons of information on there. If you have 5 or 10 minutes to breeze through there, see what's available on there. Specifically to Aurora, we have thousands of sites and tens of thousands of people that are going to have access to this system. So we're not going to be able to handhold everybody with every single question. So we are really going to rely on some of the education being through what's available on the website. So please make sure that you check out the website, and there are FAQs. We had a number of presentations I mentioned in July where we had it was about 1,000, 1,200 people that had been on the initial calls. So they've seen this information before, and they submitted questions in the chat, and we put those all into the FAQs. So a lot of the questions that we saw from across all 4 presentations were very similar or the same. So if you have a question, it's probably there. So I'd suggest checking there first. But as always, we do answer the phone, and people know who we are, where we are, and how to get in touch with us. So feel free to reach out to PMB if you need to also.
That was actually my last question, Matt. It's not actually my last question. I have more questions, but the last question on my list was, how do we contact PMB for help, and what's the expected turnaround times for responses and those kinds of things?
So there's a couple different ways. We obviously have our phone. That is, up until the pandemic, we had someone answering that all the time. But they're checking that every half hour to an hour. So if you do call, leave a message, we'll get back to you. If you don't get an answer, or if you just want to send us an email, you can send an email to pmbafterhours@mail.nih.gov, and we'll respond to those usually within 24 business hours. We do have someone that is specifically triaging those for Aurora questions. So you'll get a consistent person, a consistent answer. Hopefully you get that anyway from us, but there is one person that's really focused on answering the questions directly about Aurora.
I've personally reached out to that PMB After Hours email address about a drug transfer satellite site issue, and really wonderfully responsive and comprehensive in their response. So
good. Yeah. And so thank you for saying transfers and local destructions. That's something that we're excited about. We're pharmacy geeks, but we're excited because we're going to be able to eliminate a lot of the paperwork that goes into those. You're going to be able to initiate those transfers and the local destructions. Once you start on the EDARF, everything is going to be a local destruction if you have to get rid of supplies. So that's going to be a transaction where you put it into Aurora. I think I showed I don't know if I have that screen here. Yeah, so up in the right-hand corner, the local destruction and transfers, those, we have a dashboard that looks very similar. Ours is busier, but that will come into us and let us know that there's a transfer ready for us to look at or a local destruction for us to look at, and we'll be able to handle that. And obviously, since it's electronic, we can take care of that almost immediately if you need to. So if you reach out, and again, I think I mentioned it in the presentation, but do I have a pointer here? Oh, no. All right, I'm good at breaking stuff, but no. So up in the right-hand corner anyway, there's a question mark. Everybody knows what the question mark is. I don't know what's happening on the screen. Push the button. It'll pull up a specific help topic that's on that screen, tell you how to manage your tabs, tell you how to access things that are on there. And then the dialogue, the two little bubbles, talk bubbles, you'll be able to reach out to us directly. Again, that's more of like a IM text message kind of thing. We'll get a notification that there's a question that's come in or a comment that's come in, and we'll be able to address it right in the system. And it will save that. So if you have your, communication trail and you want to go back and say, well, what did those guys say? You'll be able to access it through there as well.
One of the questions that we've had, and I know that you stated this earlier in the presentation, obviously we know that Aurora is going to be mandatory to use for drug ordering. It's going to completely replace the old system. And I think I heard you say it, but I just want to make sure for everyone that we're clear that when the EDARF, the phase 2 is launched in February or March, there's going to be a bit of is there like a grace period? And will, after some period of time, EDARFs become completely mandatory? No more paper DARFs?
That's the plan.
Okay.
So we're looking at releasing phase 2. So phase 1 is the OAOP and the PSD. You see the primary shipping designee tab up there. That's going to be released in the initial phase 1. Phase 2 is going to come a month or two later once we kind of settle the boat a little bit from the OAOP, and then we're looking at probably a 6-month period of time where we would expect people to transition before we make it mandatory.
Right. Okay. And then one of the last
Interject a question related to that. Will all of the studies that we order drug for from PMB be automatically converted at the same time? Will there still be paper DARFs for some older studies, or are these only newer studies?
No,
It's everything all or nothing?
Well, once you go into and it's hard to, without having the ability to show you the setup, the application itself. Once you so the ordering comes in, you put your order in, we send it to you. A little thing pops up in the processing orders. And then if it's the first time that we're sending it to you, you'll see the EDARFs to be acknowledged. So you send it, you'll be able to initiate an EDARF from the shipment. So it will ask you, have you ever ordered on this protocol before? Do you have any current inventory? And it will be able to kind of fill in some of the blanks, and it will start the EDARF for you. So the transition should be pretty painless.
That's kind of cool.
Obviously, if you say that you want to keep some paper for a while, there's not going to be, you just receive it and be done with it. But one of the things that this is important for people to know, once it launches, you have to establish your shipping addresses and your control and satellite locations. So once you put that in the system, and that's under the accountability tab, it's in the dark bar up there, you can establish your control and satellite addresses, and that will be what populates on every DARF. So you don't have to worry about making an error, receiving it under the wrong investigator, or any of that kind of stuff, because when it comes to you and it shows up in your EDARF form as a drug receipt, it will create a DARF and it will match up and go to the correct DARF.
Yeah, I think, question. Go ahead.
In the DARFs stored on our system, or we need to kind of save them somewhere on our drives locally?
The EDARFs?
Yes.
They will all be
Can
on
you
the
repeat
system.
the question, just so the folks online can hear it?
Sure. So the question was, once you create an EDARF, do you have to save it on a local drive or a local system to then continue it? No, everything will be right in Aurora itself. It will be stored there in perpetuity. So if you need to reference it 5 years, 10 years from now, it will be in the system and accessible in an archive.
And everyone who has access to the site will be able to go to the EDAR.
So you'll have to be either part of the, you'll have to be part of the PSD package. So I don't know, do people in here know what a PSD package is?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So we had probably within the last 10 to 12 years, we've tried to establish a consistent address at a site for shipping drug to. In the past, someone might say suite 12, suite 201, or the address might be slightly different. We've standardized that in the PSD package. The address is part of that. The person that we're sending the drug to is part of that. That's we'll call them the PSD, or the primary shipping designee, and they have control to modify that address, change the people that can order on the studies. So you have the address, you have the PSD, and then you have POD, the primary ordering designees. So anybody, whether it's the technicians that are going to be doing the EDARF or whether they're going to be doing the ordering, should be on the PSD form, and then they'll have access based on what their rights are within the system. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Okay. Matt, you talked about this in your presentation, about allowing a single investigator to have multiple shipping addresses assigned to them, which is a great advancement. We wanted to ask you if will Aurora allow for managing a patient within an NCORE network system, where they may be seen at multiple different locations at treatment at different points in their participation on a clinical trial?
So that's kind of a complicated trick question. But
Not a trick question, just a complicated question.
So I know we've had this conversation before. If you talk in the context of a central pharmacy transporting to satellite pharmacies, they're going to be able to do that just like they do now. There's not going to be a limitation on, oh, this person has an EDARF here and this person's on the, the patient ID is on the EDARF here. It can't be on the EDARF there. The thing to make sure, if you're going to have that situation, though, is to make sure that the treating investigator has the practice sites, all the multiple practice sites listed on their 1572, and that the delegation of tasks log has the appropriate people on it to do that. So there won't be, there are many health systems out there that have multiple locations and people go at their convenience, or depending where the physician is on a given day. So that's not going to be a limitation.
Wonderful.
Can I ask a question about that? Here's today's scenario for real from my program. We have a patient who's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who needs to have radiation oncology in Muskegon, Michigan, which is an hour 15 away. And there are 2 sites in Muskegon, and may have also part of their treatment at another site an hour north of Grand Rapids. So does the registration have to be linked to any one of those specific locations to generate the appropriate drug ordering? Like the treating location, is that the one we have to register to, or is there any?
The patient registration or the drug order?
The patient registration, does that have anything to do with the drug ordering? Do they have to be the same, which is a question that's being discussed at our site right now?
No. So and I made reference to this earlier. We will call you if we get a drug order for a new study at your site, because we don't see a registration at your site. So we're going to have a link directly to Open, and it's going to be near real time. So we'll know. So don't lie again, just like the training. So once we can see that patient in Open, then we won't have to call you or bug you. So we'll send it to if we're sending it to the central location and then you transport it out. That's
So the secret is where we order it to It's really the same drug ordering process we would normally use today.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Good, thank you.
That's the end of my list of prepared questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm just happy no one threw anything.
Well, otherwise,
There's still
we
time.
have Matt. Do you want to show some of the slides? Have you shown us all of your resource slides that you prepared for us?
Can we get you the mic real quick, Nikki?
This came from one of our site pharmacists, and they were wondering and knowing that an integration was going to be possible in the future, if they could put the bug in the air for the possibility of the integration to be the way that the site source could feed into Aurora. Do you know if that will be possible, or is the integration going to be the other way?
That's a good question. I think that we have to be careful how an external source can feed into a federal
Right.
data system. So I don't know that I have an answer for that right now. But I can tell you that we've built the portals to be able to communicate. It's just how that communication happens. And if I would guess, it's going to be us feeding information out. And if, it might be a situation where, it feeds pieces of information and it helps populate Vestigo or NCOOP or whatever other system there is that people are using. So if I had to guess, it's going to be a push out rather than a pull in.
And so our current electronic systems are integrated with our CTMS so that patients populate, and they were wondering if the link to open was going to feed onto the DARFs so that patients are already populated.
I'm not sure about that. I know that when you order the drug, you'll be able to select people. When you have the DARF, you'll be able to select people. I'm not sure that, that might be a piece of information that we'll be able to feed to another system, but that's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Matt. So my question is related to that EDARF part. So is the EDARF going to be like a manual entry, or is going to be pre-populate with patient information?
So it won't pre-populate with, if we know that a patient was enrolled at your site, it's not going to automatically show up on your EDARF, the EDARF, but it will be, it should
Like a
have a link
drop-down?
that it will be able to pull that patient information in.
Okay, but it can be also manual entry, right?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure that because sometimes if the patient, we already have the agent on site and then we have a patient need to start early or very soon, then we will be able to enter the patient. So.
Yeah, so the entry of the receipts, so when you get a drug shipment, that will feed into there automatically. But the patient information and anything that you guys would normally do by hand, you should be able to do that.
And then my other question is the sort of credential or access to the system for ordering, and as well as the dispensing to access to the EDOF. Are all the personnel access to this system required register in the NCI system or IAM or RCR and all those?
So they'll have to be registered so that we know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of actually a federal requirement to know who's getting into the system. But as long as they're registered and they're listed on the PSD form, they should have access to that, because when we link them to the PSD form, they show up as an ordering designee or the primary shipping designee, and then that would give them the permissions.
Okay, yeah, because I think my concern is currently we have a lot of satellite pharmacists working in either inpatient or outpatient. Currently they are not registered under the NCI system when we're using our local electronic inventory system. So with this Aurora system, I believe then we will have to have them get the IAM registry
Right. So, I mean, our strong preference is to have, well, the minimum requirement is going to have an IAM account.
Yeah.
And that links to the IDME, which we've talked about before.
Mhm.
But that's the minimum requirement. Anyone that's involved in, usually the pharmacist, we suggest strongly that they register as an AP. And anyone that's dealing with investigational agents, we recommend that they get registered as an AP, because those are the people that we know that we have GCP training for them, and we have
Yeah.
financial disclosure information for them.
Okay.
So we're a little bit more confident of who they are and how they fit into the process, and that they have some education on investigational agents and investigational agent handling through GCP.
So for the non-IDS pharmacists or pharmacy staff, do they still require to have AP access or?
AP
Or
access
like-
is not required.
Okay.
That's part of what's on the DTL. If
Yeah.
you see the DTLs, that's one of the 12 tasks that are mandatory. That's the only task that allows an associate to be able to
Okay.
conduct that task. So they will have that ability if they don't register as an AP.
Thank you.
Matt, maybe we can just use the rest of our time to go through any of the information on your slides. That might be helpful.
Sure. So I took the opportunity to just take some screenshots of the website and what we have available, so you know that it's there and kind of where to look for it. So actually, I'm sorry, I don't have the CTEP starting page. But if you go to ctep.cancer.gov, there's a listing of the branches that are at CTEP, and PMB is in that list. That brings you to this page. There's a lot of information on this page. On the left-hand side, access to our training videos, access to the Aurora FAQ. If you want to subscribe to our newsletter or our notification system, you can do that here. That's one of the ways we've been notifying people of updates with Aurora. There's no requirement for you to be of any role or anything to subscribe to that. So if you're interested, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll send out information as it's available. Agent management, IB access. So that covered in the top, and then we get into the person registration through IAM and RCR that I talked about in the session. So that's kind of and then there's a picture of our branch chief, Skip. And our bios are there. I think if you want to see a goofy picture of me, you can pull it up and check my history. So this is the general PMB website. This is the IAM website, gives you information on how to register, when to register, that kind of information. The RCR website, this is where people go and register as a AP, MPI, VR, or investigator. And it tells you what's required documentation-wise. And this is part of our credentialing review process that's required whenever you participate in whenever someone participates in a study. I don't know if you're familiar with the 1572, but that's part of the requirements under the Code of Federal Regulations, that as the sponsor, we have to evaluate people to participate. This is our Aurora page. I obviously can't get everything on here. There's a lot of information that is below where this is, what you can see, including registering in the class system and the FAQs and the presentation that we did. I think we actually have a recording of one of them. I'm not sure which one it was, but we have a recording of that session, and the FAQs that came out of it are available at the bottom of this page. This is a good one to check if you have questions. If something doesn't sound right based on what we've talked about here, timing wise, the timing, I think actually in this presentation, in this information, I think we had September or October, but we've pushed it back to January. So this is the information that's at the bottom of that screen. So the PowerPoint presentation, the FAQs, we had generated an FAQ sheet and then added FAQs that came in through the comments section as we were doing those presentations. And then the elegant arrow there that's pointing to the question mark, the help button. Class training. So this is a listing of the videos that are currently available. Don't take pictures, go into the site and do them. So as more functionality is added, we're going to have more videos. You won't have that same narrator, so they're not as good, but you'll be able to access them at your leisure. It's about, right now, it's about an hour and a half worth of material, but they're split up into 3 to 5 to 7 minute snippets. So if you have a few minutes to take a look, take a look. This is just this will be the base screen of Aurora when you sign in. And then the contact information. So that phone number is direct to PMB, and you can certainly email me. And then also CTMB audit guidelines. We get a lot of questions about how things need to be documented, or should I, if I order under 2 different investigators, a lot of people don't know that means you have to have 2 different DARFs. So that information's all in there. You can access that. I know a lot of people don't utilize that. Maybe they don't even know that it exists, but that's a good resource too if you're looking at some of the stuff from the audit checklist and why it's there. So, that's my references.
And as noted, these slides will be posted. So thanks for sharing all of that with us, Matt.
Absolutely. We're a little scared, but we're excited to push out Aurora and move into the next phase of our technology. So hopefully it will be much better for everyone involved, and it'll reduce the paperwork requirements and reduce the burden of work and some of the stupid little audit findings that you might have,
Absolutely.
transcription errors, those kinds of things.
White out.
La, 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 la.
I can't even imagine the huge lift it was to conceive and come up with this system. So we're all in it with you, Matt.
All right.
Yep. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your attendance and sharing all this information with us.
All right.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you much, Matt. So just to transition us in 5 minutes, the next session will start in this room will be Know Your IRBs. In Comiskey will be SWOG Perspectives and Common Challenges. And in Wrigley will be Test Your Knowledge and interactive Q&A. So feel free to join the next one up. Thank you again.
Open forum session of Know Your IRB. This is a huge umbrella at this point in time. It's covering some ID Me questions. It's talking about different IRBs and their function. We are fortunate to have the same panelists that we had this morning. So Ashley Tyden joins me. Gay Lapisaran is on the phone, and I'm going to offer her an opportunity to talk for just a second because she did not speak this morning. Melina Rodriguez has joined us again. Sean England is remote. And 2 very special presenters, Laura Covington and Jackie Steenbacher, are also with us this afternoon from the CIRB, so able to answer questions. Special thanks to Megan Blackburn, who's been, completely out of this at this moment in time, but she's at Westat CTSU, and she's arranged for Ben Picaretta and Jeremy Haynes to join us from ID Me, the contractor that is supplying that. So all of these people stand at the ready to answer your questions, either from the floor or from the chat. Ashley's monitoring the chat at this moment in time, so please, if you're remote, send those questions our way. If we have time, we have some kind of what we quaintly got called cricket questions, which were, if there's absolute dead silence, what do we say? But as we get started, Gay, I wondered if you would take a moment and introduce yourself, since you didn't have a chance to speak this morning. Tell us a little bit about you and your expertise and why you joined the panel.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me and that my face isn't too close to the screen.
Actually,
I
we're
try not
just
to
working
do
off our
it.
slides.
Oh, all right. Anyway, I have my video on just in case you guys can see me. Hi. Again, good morning to everyone who's joining both online and in person in the windy city of Chicago. I'm calling in from the beautiful city of Sacramento. Hi. And as mentioned earlier, I'm a senior regulatory coordinator with the UC Davis Cancer Center with Joyce and Ashley. We have an amazing regulatory team, and data team and the clinical team and all the other departments, all just trying to make the clinical trial compliant and help as much patients as we can get into a trial. So I've always had a passion for research. So it's an honor to be here, to be able to learn and share what we can on regulatory, specifically on knowing your IRB. My experience is mostly with industry studies, investigator-initiated trials, and some federal, which use both the local IRB and the central IRB, whether it be Advera or WCG IRB or the NCIC IRB. So you can call me a hybrid, working in a hybrid situation during the pandemic. But all of these experiences really are great. And the pros of using a central IRB, definitely from me, is a faster IRB processing time during the course of the study, especially with new amendments and more complex studies come up, now that more and more studies are moving towards the protocols, or what you call the basket trials. And it's extremely positive, except with a few cons, of course, because nothing is really perfect, right, in this world, although we do really want them to be. But the key takeaway is this: whatever kind of IRB you use, the key responsibility of that IRB is to protect the right, safety, and welfare of our study subjects. They come first and foremost, and that we as a site is compliant. I've had the opportunity to work with Advera and WCG IRB for industry studies and the NCIC IRB. And whenever you do have a question, communication, as was mentioned earlier during the symposium, is really the key, so that our work is not duplicative and the review would be more efficient and high quality. So with that said, back to you, Joyce, and thanks again.
Thanks, Gay, so much for joining us. She's an outstanding resource. I want to offer both Jeremy and Ben an opportunity to introduce themselves from ID.me. Are you both on the line?
Hey everyone, this is Ben Picaretta. Jeremy will be joining shortly. He's actually at a different conference right now, but he'll be joining virtually as well in a few minutes.
So Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about how this process started with ID.me, because I think it's been a surprise to a lot of us in the research arena, but it's not a surprise out there for those folks who have held grants and been involved in some cross-licensure, state licensure issues, or Social Security, or for that matter, filed taxes with the IRS. So do me a favor, tell us a little bit about the background and your what your group does.
Of course. And just to introduce myself in a little more detail, my name is Ben Picaretta. I've been involved within the digital identity landscape for my entire career. Previously, I was a federal employee at NIST, which creates the federal guidance for online digital identity. And then afterwards as well, I was at Deloitte supporting digital identity initiatives throughout the federal landscape. So to say simply, at ID.me, we're a federally certified technology partner for secure digital identity verification. And we help make sure you're you, so you're not someone pretending to be you. Within that, we follow strict NIST guidance, more specifically 863-3, and more specifically for NIH, they follow something called IAL2 guidance, which is Identity Assurance Level 2. So that's what currently these researchers are going through to identity proofs themselves, not just at NIH, but also, like you mentioned, at IRS, VA, Social Security Administration, and so on. So we are audited and as well certified to follow this guidance. And that's where we're at today. And I'm, looking forward to answering any questions individuals may have around this.
Ben, this is Ashley. We actually had a question in the chat earlier for you. Folks were wondering if there were any other means of identifications beside using a social security number for ID.me.
Sure, and that's a great question. And I'll take a step back and explain also why we asked for the SSN. So for the social security number, that's really to uniquely identify someone. So there may be more than one Ben Picarettas in the world, and that way we're able to what we call as a unique identifier. From there, at IDMe, there is more than one way. If you don't feel comfortable, for example, to give your social security number, we also provide an option for an individual to speak with a trusted referee, otherwise known as a video chat agent. And from there, you can also share your ITIN, or if you are an international user, you could share your passport number, and that would be able to uniquely identify you.
That's great to hear that there are other alternatives. Are there questions for IDMe from the floor at this point? There are about 20 people in the room with us right now, Ben, so it's not something that you may be able to see at this moment, but it's a busy group, and it has been an extremely hot topic. I heard via another presentation that we were a bit behind the 8 ball, that this is something that's been going on for a few years. How long has IDMe been in place?
It's a great question. We've been a company since 2010. So we've been involved with uniquely identifying individuals since then. However, the identity policy for Identity Assurance Level 2 that we see across really the public sector space today, that guidance has been available since around 2016, 2017. So this actually started from an office called NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. So this was an Obama-Biden initiative looking at the identity space today, and then as well giving grants out for pilot programs for private companies to really see what can work across this area. And from there, in that specific office is as well where 863 gets updated. So to answer your question, IDMe as a company has been around for a while now, but the identity policy, it changes. And as we stand today, we expect NIST to actually release a new draft of 863. We are expecting that any day now, but we are just following the federal standard as it is today. And once that is updated, we will follow that and make sure everyone else is, or NIH specifically, is updated as well.
Thanks very much. I noted in the slide presentation today that there is a defined goal that we have to meet in terms of doing IDMe, or basically we end up not being able to access the system. Could you refresh our memory on that timeline?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Hari from CTIS, contractor for CDEP. So I can answer that question. The current timeline is that by July 2023, we would like all our current CDEP ECs or NCI CDEP users to onboard to IDMe.
Great, thank you very much. And I know that the slides were very helpful too in linking us to helpful resources and places to answer questions. Hari, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I do have, along with me, Quincy Sanderlin and Erica Patterson on the call today. We are representing CTIS, who is a contractor to CDEP, and we are responsible for implementing this solution for the integration between CDEP IAM and IDMe, and also supporting and development and maintenance activities for CDEP's CDEP applications.
Great, thank you very much.
Ben, if there's, we have some folks in the chat that have emailed IDMe requesting to have their accounts linked, but are having trouble reaching someone. What's the best way to reach IDMe if they have questions or concerns?
It's a great question. Typically, you just go to help.id.me and submit a help desk ticket that way. That would be the best approach. However, NIH is a little different. You have to connect your IDMe account to your CTEP account. From there, I would recommend that you reach out to the NIH help desk, and Harry, I'll kind of lean on you on specifically what that email is. It's largely a two-step process. You create your IDMe account, to verify at IAL2, the federal standard, and then from there, you're linking your identity to the CTEP account.
Sure. So just to add to what Ben mentioned, ctephelp@nih.gov is the mailbox, which is the first mailbox that I would request all users to reach. And we will take a look at the issue that the user is reporting, especially for the individual who has noted on the chat saying that they reached out to IDME on multiple times and there is no response. So such, we have a mechanism to escalate in scenarios where IDME can, prioritize certain requests and look at it immediately. And in certain other scenarios, when these requests come to us, it might be that the users were successful in establishing an IDME account, but they were having difficulty in establishing a connection between IDME and CTEP. So in those scenarios, we will take care of it in a sense that we'll investigate what the issue is and guide the user in the right direction.
Great, thank you very much. I wanted to direct a more generalized question to all of our panelists that have experience working with individual and different IRBs. There came out in our early discussions about this session, the discussion of having compliance represented. And I think we all are aware that they are a separate department and monitor many of the things that we are doing. I wanted to ask if each one of our panelists would discuss just briefly your experience with compliance, when you've been involved with them, in what way, and tips and tricks for how to work through this, because the viewpoint is somewhat different and can be challenging for new people understanding the interface between our regulatory work and the compliance activities of the institution. If I can ask Laura and Jackie, if you can kind of start out with that, please.
Laura, you're on mute.
From our perspective, compliance is an institutional responsibility. So what we do is collect some basic information on how that, how compliance and oversight is done by the institution. And we use that when we're assessing the signatory institution.
Great, thank you. Melina, I know, is in the room with me. If you'd like to address that, that would be great.
Lena, let me get you a mic.
We'll get you a mic, hang
on. Same. Check. Similar. Compliance is an institutional responsibility. Yeah, I don't have much more than to add to that.
Gay, if I can ask you to speak about that, and then I know Ashley can do so also. I think the thing that we've encountered too is that there's a close link where we are between compliance and our regulatory group. If you can talk a little bit about your experience.
Well, as mentioned earlier, compliance is a shared responsibility. So if there is anything during the trial that we see it's a question of being compliant, then pick up the phone, call, or reach out to the compliance department in your institution and get their guidance. We always have had issues mostly on the PHI related events, and just letting them know earlier on than later is, I think, the best practice to have at every institution, and prevents major deviations as well for the study. And of course, protects patient safety.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what Gay said, just that open communication with your compliance team. I take a very similar approach towards compliance as I do with our IRB. So I think it's really important to have regular meetings with your compliance officers to share operational problems that you might be running into. If you see repeated problems with PHI breaches or anything else that compliance might need to be aware of, sharing those concerns with them and asking them to come in and provide training to staff members. It's just a really great way to foster a relationship and get a better understanding of where compliance is coming from and where your team is coming from, so you can work better together. Definitely view it like Laura said, it's an institutional responsibility. I think we're all responsible for compliance. And so their compliance is just another really great resource and team to work with.
So Sean, can you add some local context from Kentucky?
I can try, yeah. Of course, there are different layers and levels of compliance. I mean, we of course have an internal quality assurance department that we work very closely with. We're very proactive. I'd like to kind of understand what I'm getting into as we progress into a specific situation, so I can kind of understand the rules of engagement, so to speak. And then just an open communication with the other levels and the other layers is, of course, key. I'd rather have that open communication up front, so I can sort of have, in that way, when there is an issue, you already sort of have a dialogue going. But that's kind of our approach.
That sounds great. I know ours is similar. I think it's easier to ask questions up front and not wait than it is to circle around behind them after events have already happened. On a completely different note, we were talking amongst the group that there is a lot of challenge managing annual CIRB, annual PI worksheets and keeping them up to date. So I'm going to circle through everyone in this panel. If you would pop in when you when there's a pause. But we really have, I know, struggled with the volume that's comes up at least once a year. And so I wanted to talk about tips and tricks and how you manage that.
So I'll chime in and say that we struggle with the volume as well. As you can tell from the fact that a lot of those worksheets have been sitting for quite a while. We have hired 2 new people, and their job to start is to get through the backlog that we have. So that's where we are with them, that yes, there are a lot of them and they do take up a lot of time.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, for PI annual worksheet, like Laura, we had a backlog for a while on our regulatory team. It was survival mode. And so we were, making sure that we're compliant. And so now that I have 2 new regulatory coordinators, Geneva and Virginia, they are taking the lead on our backlog. I just want to say they've been doing amazing work. They use an Excel tracker. This has helped them foster relationships with the PIs as well and with the research managers. So they're getting some touch points on that. And so I think now what we're going to do is have a workflow document. And then we're basically just going to plan a yearly little sprint and make sure that we plan accordingly as far as everyone's workload is concerned.
That's a great way of referring to it, Melina. It is a sprint at a certain time of year.
Yeah,
Sean? Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to say from the CIRB's perspective that we've changed the worksheet. Many of you have submitted it, but if you have multiple PIs, I would recommend submitting one, getting any feedback on that one, and then using those answers once that one is approved to submit your other ones. If you have a lot of PIs, it will save you a lot of time and a lot of back and forth, and same with us. So that's a little tip and trick to maybe streamline the process by doing one for your site, get it approved, and then you can use that information as appropriate for the other PIs at your institution so that you're not doing the same thing 20 times.
You can't see it, Laura, but there's a lot of head nodding in the room.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, whereas we only are generally our site, but we have a lot of investigators. We have, I don't know the current number, but like 20 some odd. So I 100% agree with you on that, just assembly on that thing. Because yeah, and for us, the answers are pretty much the same, and year to year, there's not a lot of change. Yeah. So we do definitely sort of clone and duplicate a lot of those. I mean, we do take stock every year and say, has it changed? But generally the answer is no. The big pieces don't really. And we work with our local IRB who, are part of that interface, and try to determine, are there changes or are there not? If not, I think they actually lately have been doing a lot of some of those submissions or helping us with that, which has been huge. It used to be a set something on your calendar and everybody buckle up for a lot of submissions. And thankfully we've kind of evolved past that, it seems. So yeah, that's how we're doing it.
I'd just like to reiterate what the others have said regarding the trackers and putting things on your calendar, just to be sure that your PI has ample time to review whatever things they need to review. And, you know, buckle up if there's like a bulk of studies happening all at the same time for the annual review. But definitely trackers and putting it on your calendar works very well, so that we get to that deadline for the continuing review submissions.
Great, thanks very much. Gay, you brought up something that was really important to me. How do you stay organized? What are your favorite tips, tricks, and tools that you use to make sure that you stay on time? Because particularly with the CIRB, there are very defined and clear and short timelines. What tools do you use?
Well, I'm both old school and I don't think I'm part of the Gen Z yet, or Gen X, or whatever generation you call them, but I use a lot of trackers, as I mentioned. I have Excel sheets noting all of the renewals due, the mods received, the RNIs that are pending, the new studies that are pending activation. And the calendar really works. There's a project planner that I've started trying to put into my system. I'm not very techie, but if I can do it, anyone can. And it's working great so far. But I'm just having to have an overview of your, protocols that you have in the projects that you were assigned to, really makes a difference in making your daily activities more what I call it, not like in a survival mode kind of every day. Which is always having to get.
Crisis intervention and survival mode.
Yes.
Sean, how about you?
I think a lot of the things we've spoken about already, a lot of the trackers, Encore, a lot of notifications. I like things that sort of remember things for me. I try to leave as little to chance, but I do like having sort of redundant systems. Like we'll have a manual tracker and then we'll have like an Encore report or an Encore notification. And so hopefully both things aren't both wrong about the same thing at the same time. So when they don't match or don't agree, then that tells us we may need, one or the other may need to be investigated, or probably both. So that kind of stuff. I like having a little bit of redundancy in the system. So, it's real easy for one data point to be off and throw off an Encore notification, but your tracker probably won't be off in the same way. So stuff like that. We do a little bit of redundancy that way, just to be safe on things.
So Melina, you're specifically of interest to me on this because I know we're considering an electronic regulatory system, and there are some choices out there that I spoke about when we were in the final wrap up of the morning session. Can you tell us a little bit about those kinds of the tools that you use, but also how your eReg helps you with that?
Yeah, definitely. So eReg, luckily, I'm not in charge of that. We have a designated senior regulatory coordinator, Casey Lopez. She's basically manages a team to roll out Florence updates, track attestation, signature attestation, so that it's so that anybody can apply their stamp to their DOA or AE log. Yeah, Florence has been really great for PI oversight. Additionally, it has an audit trail. So if something's deleted, you have to put in a reason for why that document will be deleted. Even with folders, you have to document. There's just so many checks and balances within Florence. It's really comforting to know that we're putting our documents, our essential documentation in there, and that it's a binder that has global access, at least for the study team, utilizing that. And I think that's where a lot of the those excess emails that we get, like, can you send me this? Is this person on the DOA? What's the most, there's all these little questions. And that way we have like an ownership regulatory wise of it, but we can also share that work and it's not just siloed within our team. I also utilize a lot of Excel trackers. I ask my team to use Encore as the source of truth. But like Sean said, there's a lot of redundancy. So we're always checking. Last thing I will say for tracking modifications, CRRs, radiation safety renewals, noncompliance. I don't know who built it out before me, but it was implemented before I came to the team. It's a SharePoint tracker. And basically within 60 days of any study protocol expiring, it'll pop up on our SharePoint tracker. So we know that upcoming renewal is coming. We keep an eye out for it on CTSU. So as soon as we receive that CRR posting, I give my team 20 days to process it. And then once they're done and all the checks and balances and all their checklists are done, they can remove it from our tracker. Same thing with modifications. We post it there. That way there's no question as to whether somebody is assigned to it, who's doing it, and how long we're taking to process those amendments.
Melina, if you can pass the mic down, we're fortunate to have Anthony Hicks joining us from the Cancer Research Consortium of West Michigan. Anthony, talk to us about the tips and things that you use to stay organized.
Yeah, so we use a lot of Excel, also our CTMS credit and our website. Those are the three big things that we use. But I did have a question. You said Encore and Florence, do they talk? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So
hopefully at one point we can integrate that. Hopefully at one point we can integrate Encore or CTMS more appropriately and Florence. But right now we're just trying to get people signing their attestations and getting comfortable with accessing an e-binder system.
It is a big leap and it's a big organizational project. And so I think it's something that we'll all be thinking about eventually, but it does require a fair amount of capital financing also. So it's something that we all have to plan for. So a little bit of switching gears. The pandemic's been a really interesting couple years that we've all somehow managed to slog through. And, there are two things that happened as a result of the pandemic. Some of them were great things. We learned about a number of things that we could do remotely, learned a number of things that we could manage in ways that we either had not been allowed or had not tried before. We also were strongly affected by staffing challenges. The Great Resignation occurred pretty much everywhere across the United States. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists if you would weigh in on those two very diverse topics. What was the impact at your site during the pandemic? How did that feel in terms of staffing, workload, and et cetera? And then what were the efficiencies that you discovered, the new things that you tried that helped to make your life through the pandemic a little bit more successful? Anthony, do you want to do me a favor and start out since you're with us?
what was the first question? What was the first question again?
The first part A is, how did your site make it through this? Because we all know that people resigned, new people came in, we had training challenges. It was just pretty much a real big challenge, and that's the nicest word I can think of. Part B is, what things happened that were positive out of that? What efficiencies did you discover? What new ways of doing things?
I will start with part B. We went from total 100% paper to electronic. That was a huge benefit. And going to your first question, I think, it was a challenge. I mean, there was no easy way about it. You go from being in the office 100% of the time to being at home 100%. So you have that aspect, but you also have, now you got to be, in teams, you have to still be organized. That's a challenge. Luckily, we were able to make it through. Okay. But it's definitely a challenge. Sure.
Did you face staffing challenges? Did you lose staff?
We did. We lost a lot of our nurses. Our reg team pretty much stayed intact. But we've lost 6 nurses total. So
it's been interesting where the impacts are in different places. Thanks for sharing. Melina, how about at your site?
Yeah, actually, so I was hired December 2020. So right in the height of the
You're a
pandemic.
pandemic person.
Yeah, I
That's
am.
great.
And I had never worked from home before. I was always a research coordinator in there with patients, going to sites, lugging around my Pelican cases. But when I joined the team, it was me and another regulatory coordinator, Diana Cervantes. She had been there about 2.5 years so far, so she was a great resource. And about 2 months after I was hired, our leadership for reg for NCTN left. And so Diana was tasked with carrying our NCTN regulatory program, so 28 affiliate sites, 109 protocols. We were struggling. We were in survival mode, but Diana and I have a really good relationship. We just work super well together. And I think she was able to train me pretty quickly. And I just took ownership of it because I knew it was sink or swim at that point. And we made it through. And luckily enough, my boss, our new boss, had enough confidence in me to have her move off the team so that she could expand her regulatory knowledge, and I was able to take over that NCTN reg team as a lead. But it was hard. It was really hard. I won't sugarcoat it. But I think our leadership always showed up for us. They were always available to talk. They let us know that if we ever needed a moment to just take a break, we could always do that. And I think having that safety was super important. And I just want to continue that culture within our team moving forward.
I think you raise a really interesting thing that, that was part of what made your culture survive, was how you treated each other. I'm sorry, can we pass the mic back? Great, thank you so much. Do you have a question or comment?
Yes. Are the nurses who left, are they senior nurses? Did they decide to retire or what? Because I heard from my colleagues that there are a lot of senior nurses who, during the pandemic, they decided to take early retirement or just quit. And about the coordinators, where did the coordinators go? Because school, did they go to school? Did they go elsewhere?
So we did have a couple of our nurses retired, but we also had some of our younger nurses move on to different roles. So that's kind of what happened at our consortium.
Yeah, we had a lot of coordinators. We're still going through a lot of turnover, and that's just protocol training for us. And I tell my team, no matter what, we're going to have them. So we just make peace with it because our teams need the support. So it's not, we can't say like, oh, this, I never try to have a bad outlook on it because I know this is all in the name of patient safety. So getting them trained. But yeah, it's been quite a few protocol trainings we've been processing for a few years.
Ashley and Gay, you want to talk about our experience with both the staffing as well as the two original questions?
Yes. Gay, do you want to go first?
You go ahead, Ashley. The floor is yours.
So I experienced the pandemic actually at a different institution, a prior institution. We experienced a lot of the same problems that I've heard from everybody, staffing losses. I noticed a lot of people, I think, just had a different outlook on life after the pandemic and just decided that they were looking for something else and had different passions that maybe they hadn't allowed themselves to think about before. I had several people have babies and just not come back from their leaves. And I think that's just what they decided was, important in their lives, and wanted to really honor that and not kind of give a lot of people grace for what they decided they wanted to do after the pandemic. I spoke earlier about some of the positives that came from it, and I do just, I'm so grateful that it allowed this really broader conversation within our workplaces about different approaches. Oh, I was in a different session yesterday, the NCORE session, and one of the presenters said that she doesn't say work-life balance, she says life-work balance. And I love that. I think it's all forced us just to look a lot more closely at how hard we're pushing ourselves and our team members, and how important it is to really take care of ourselves and each other. and then the technology advances. I can't tell you how many investigators I had that would not sign anything electronically. I had to present myself at their door to have a paper signed. And I don't have to do that anymore, which is wonderful. You know, I don't have to have a team member who spends 80% of their time obtaining signatures. We can just email them. So some of these things that have come from the pandemic have been actually really wonderful for research.
Hey, Joyce, we do have another question over here.
Sure, go ahead.
This is pertaining to his question about the nurses. A lot of our nurses left our facility to go to do staffing work. That's what they went to do. And also I got hired in the middle of the pandemic, July 2020. That's how the DocuSign came about at our facility as well.
Yes.
Being able to obtain signatures and keep research afloat, because research did slow down at our facility during that time.
I too made that same transition from being at a different institution during the pandemic, and I can tell you that basically the site shut down for about 6 weeks and paused until we were sure. That said, it was a site outside of New York City. At its peak, there were well over 500 patients that had taken over the cancer floors in that institution and were being treated. So it was an overflow from the New York City area, and it was pretty intense, as a matter of fact. Our biggest hit, though, interestingly enough, was in regulatory. It was not in clinical staff at that site. And yet here at the site I'm at now, our biggest hit was, for the most part, in clinical. So I think it depended on, you know, in some manner, how nimbly you moved, what the accommodations were, what your site was willing to do, what the tools, tips, and tricks that you were using in an electronic environment. I think there were a lot of things that mattered. But I also noticed, very honestly, that it was associated with where people were in their life. And there were age brackets where there were differences in what happened. When there were young children involved and there were kids in the home, there were some really tough decisions made about caregivers because kids were suddenly at home full time, and that was the safe place. And yet that was also the place that it was incredibly difficult to figure out how to work and watch, you know, the circus in the background. And so, only it wasn't always in the background, it sometimes floated across the screen, right? So I think it's really important to understand that it was very age directed. It was very socioeconomically directed. If people could afford or their job adapted, great. If it didn't, you were really in trouble really quickly. So that impacted which groups were most affected. Gate, do you want to talk about, because you were here in the pandemic in Sacramento at that time?
Yes, I can describe the pandemic in 2 words: resilience and an amazing race. Survival mode. Well, that's 3 words, sorry. Survival mode. So I started in January of 2020, and we shut down March of 2020. So I was relatively new to the institution because I hailed from Stanford for 5 years. So the processes were very different, and then all of a sudden shut down. So I was fortunate. I had like 2 months to get on board, and then the lockdown happened. And I think I call our team, and I call this the whole department, not just the regulatory team, the Ronin group. So if you remember the movie, the Ronin, they were just a group of people, and then they're all running to the goal. And then one by one, they got shot, right? But instead of being shot, of course, in this case, it's they leave because of the high turnover during the pandemic. And one positive that came from this one was teamwork. We had to depend on each other for writing documents, for getting the hybrid remote. Initially, it was very rough, and at first, I guess leadership was also new to this, so they were trying to make the setup easy for everyone, and of course, amenable to the union and to the institution. So it was a process, and again, it was the resilience and being able to help each other during this pandemic that led us to where we are, I guess, hopefully an endemic at this time. But again, while everything shut down, clinical research didn't shut down because cancer doesn't stop. And our subject, you know, patients really need the trials to at least have the hope that it can be stopped, right? So I guess the pandemic helped really to help those patients know that the people working with clinical trials never stopped working and is still continuing to this point.
Thanks. Sean, how was it in Kentucky?
I'm just taking in everything that everyone has said. Yeah, it's a lot of the same things you guys experienced. I mean, University of Kentucky is in Lexington, which is in central part of the state. It's a fairly, you know, decent sized little area. One of the first thing I learned was, gee, there's 3 of us out of the group that all live an hour away. And so we're not really even that close to the actual facility that we've been working in. I didn't fully appreciate that until the pandemic. And I realized that not everybody has good internet access. Some people live far away and have really spotty internet. But the first thing we did was sort of, you know, take stock of what resources we had. We all went home, I think on March 13th or whatever it was. We all took stock of who's got internet, who's got a laptop. I already had one because I was reg lead and I was already working 1 day a week remotely before the pandemic. So I'd already kind of had a workflow ready to go because I was just kind of just piloting that. But when all of a sudden the entire team was thrown into that, it was a challenge. We didn't have enough laptops really to go around. We had people trying to figure out how to get VPNs working on their own machines, which is a whole other challenge. So it was quite a, you know, gut punch at first there, but you know, one of the things that was sort of where our reg huddle was born. It was my, you know, then we did like every day. It was like every single day we're going to log on for just a few minutes, make sure everyone has internet, make sure everyone is present and accounted for. And then just kind of, you know, see what, if anybody needs something. And then over time, it became a thing where it kind of backed off a little bit. And then some people were going on site eventually. And so we had people on site collecting signatures, picking up things as needed. It was sort of this evolution. I mean, on the downside, all the challenges everyone has named, we felt that quite a bit. I think there was a little bit of a discussion about how fast does regulatory come back to site, right? Like we're currently hybrid, but I was sort of one of the leaders as someone who's in a family. You know, we as a family were, you know, as COVID people go, we were fairly cautious. And there are some people that really weren't worried about it. But, you know, I have a teenage daughter, I have a wife. We all kind of were on the more conservative side of, I'm not really wanting to go on site. And there were some discussions with leadership about what our new workflow is going to look like. What is our hybrid really going to be? So there's a lot of that. There was a lot of, honestly, the one thing that got me the most was when anyone would refer to 2020 as downtime. I've worked, you know what I mean? I've done regulatory since 2001 in a couple different settings. I've never worked so hard as I did in 2020. I worked 12-hour days on the regular. And when someone would say downtime, I would just about lose it. I'm like, what job do you all have if you don't have my job? You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so those are the negatives. On the positives, yeah, we embraced technology. We learned how to communicate in more varied ways, more openly. In a lot of ways, you know, you put a bunch of people in a foxhole, those people kind of come together. And, you know, me and my team, I think, did that pretty well. We're proud of that. There was a core group of us there at the beginning. And, you know, Stephanie that's on this call, Jeff that's on this call. And I'm really proud of how we kind of all worked together and, you know, found a way to do some stuff that we hadn't done previously. And I don't know. So I think overall, in the end, I think we're a lot stronger than we were. I think I'm a way better lead or whatever. You know, I think in my role as a manager, I've learned a lot more about how to work with a group of people in a way that's not only more productive, but also, you know, a little bit more understanding. Yeah. You know, like you get to learn more about people's lives, and therefore you kind of, you know, you treat them a little differently as you kind of get to know them a little better, because it really kind of thrust us into the same little box that we had to work in. And so I think in the end, somehow it was actually a positive in some ways. So anyway,
thanks so much. I think you raised something really interesting. To this day, we're still huddling and communicating because we're still having people fall ill, and they can be very ill very quickly. And we did have one of our staff members who was hospitalized and was on a vent, and we had no idea that that had happened, and all of a sudden it occurred. And there was dead silence, and everybody got very panicky. So we have learned to communicate with each other, even though we are not sitting next to each other, and it's a good thing to continue. We're going to wrap up, but I wanted to ask Laura and Jackie from the CIRB, how did this end up with you all? Because the pandemic had to change things pretty dramatically with remote consent and some of the policies. What was it like on your end?
Jackie, I think you were more involved at the time with the policy changes. So do you have anything you want to talk about?
Well, when the when the pandemic first hit, of course, you know, we, like everybody else, was trying to scramble around, trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do things? And things were, as everyone knows, were changing significantly day by day, and then sometimes hour by hour, and just trying to keep up with how, you know, remote consent and things like that. But luckily, you know, after the first 6-8 weeks or so, things kind of settled down a little bit, if you can call it that. And we kind of got into a rhythm and a groove of how things are going to be done. And luckily, with things like remote consent and stuff, we're looking at, you know, keeping it once this is all over with, and making things easier across the board in some ways for everyone. Luckily, on our end, we didn't lose anybody staff-wise. So, you know, we all just kind of transitioned to working from home. And in all honesty, I don't think any of us are going back to the office. We are just working from, it's been 2 years. Why don't we all just work from home? It's just,
And
I think
gotta
that's
admit,
true.
It's made hiring a little bit easier because we can hire from anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
/ world in some cases. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. So we don't have to have somebody who's in the area to hire. We can hire remotely.
Great. I want to say thanks to all of our panelists today. All of you have been spectacular, staying with us throughout the day. I want to say thanks to everybody in the room for attending. And please, if you have a minute to fill out an evaluation, we're very interested in your comments. Thanks, everybody, very much for joining us today.